Hey everyone, Mrs. Horn here. Today I'm going to give you some notes for chapter 24, and we're focusing on three things. The first is defining what a species is and how a species is different from another. We're going to talk about mechanisms that are built in to nature to prevent a new species from being created. There are also mechanisms that would allow a new species to evolve. We call that speciation. And the third thing I want to briefly touch on is time. How long might something like that take? So let's start on page 13, defining the biological species concept. And it simply means that members of a population can breed, they can produce fertile offspring. They cannot do this with an individual from another species. A good example here, I found a YouTube video from Khan Academy. It's titled Species. It's about 8 minutes long if you wanted to check out the whole thing. But I have a screenshot of it here which gives us the definition of a species. It's just what I said. It's that animals can interbreed and they produce fertile offspring. The examples that are here are a lion. If you were to mate a lion with a tiger, you've probably heard of this. They call it a liger. We also can mate a donkey with a horse, and the result is a mule. Now, a liger and a mule are not considered a new species because they are not able to breed with another liger or mule, and they also these individuals here are not fertile offspring, so they're another reason why they're not their own individual species. The individual that came up with this definition was Ernst Mayr, and that was in the early 1940s. He also said that members of a species are reproductively compatible. So to horses, they're in the same species, they are compatible in that they can reproduce, they reproduce at the same time, and their offspring will be fertile, and then their offspring will be able to reproduce with another horse. There are some ways that are some checkpoints that are built into nature, and the first type of barrier that I want to talk about is a prezygotic barrier. This type of barrier is one that would stop mating altogether, or it would stop the fertilization of two different species. So the purpose of this barrier is nature's way of saying that that's not supposed to happen. Those two organisms are not supposed to create an offspring. So the next few examples I'm going to give are ways that stop mating altogether or that prevent the fertilization of two different species. The first one is called habitat isolation. This is where two organisms live in very different habitats within the same area. An example of this would be two different species of garter snakes, one that lives in water and one that lives on land. Because they require two different habitats, those types of snakes will never be in the same place at the same time and hence will never reproduce. Another type of barrier is called a behavioral isolation. This is where a signal will attract the proper mate, the mate of the same species. And a good example, and we see this in the summer, usually late July, early August, fireflies. Male fireflies have a specific signal and how many blinks of their light they do, and it's in a certain rhythm based on what species there are. The female firefly is only going to respond to the signal of her own species. So this behavior is a way to prevent different species of fireflies from mating with each other. Temporal isolation is when species breed at different times of the day, different season, or in some cases in different years. Skunk is a good example of this. We have the western spotted skunk and the eastern spotted skunk. Those two species are never going to mate because they don't mate at the same time. The western skunk is going to mate late summer, whereas the eastern skunk mates in late winter. Now they both live in the same area, so they're both in the same part of the country, have different names, but they're never going to mate because that doesn't happen at the same time. Mechanical isolation is very simple. They are anatomically incompatible. Male and female organs of very closely related species physically don't go together. And if they don't go together, then sperm cannot be transferred to the proper place. It's never going to meet the egg, and hence another barrier for preventing fertilization and the creation of a new species. And the last prezygotic barrier is gametic isolation. So it has the word gamete in it. This is when molecules on the egg will recognize only complementary molecules on a sperm cell. So gametic isolation is in the event that two organisms of two different species have actually found each other at the right time in the same habitat, have actually gone through the act of mating, and the sperm are somehow inside the female body looking for the egg. If it actually gets that far, the sperm has to have molecules on the outside of it that are going to match the receptor molecules on the outside of the egg. A great example of this would be external fertilization of aquatic animals. Many aquatic animals do reproduce externally, and they simply release the sperm into the water. The sperm then have to swim and search out the compatible egg. A sperm may approach an egg, but if it doesn't fit, if the receptor does not fit into the complementary molecule, then the sperm is not going to fertilize that egg. Well, if all of those things fail, and let's say two individuals from two different species have somehow mated and their sperm cell and egg cell have come in contact with each other, all hope is not lost. We also have something called a post-zygotic barrier. So post would mean after, zygotic refers to the zygote. So if a zygote has actually been created, the prevention still could exist of preventing that zygote from becoming an embryo or becoming an adult. So the first one is reduced hybrid viability. This is when the genetic incompatibility will abort the embryo. So the zygote may exist, the zygote may divide by mitosis and undergo cell division and become an embryo, but genetic incompatibility means that the DNA of the two different species was so different that the embryo will be aborted. A good example of this are frogs. There are frogs that are in the same genus category, different species, but being in the same genus, they are fairly similar in that they can reproduce at the same time of the year, same season, they live in the same habitat. However, when a zygote is created, the embryo does not survive. Another method would be the reduced hybrid fertility. This is where a hybrid species does actually survive. So when I say hybrid, I'm referring to the offspring created from two different species, and that offspring does survive, but it's not genetically compatible with any other species. It's nothing like anything else. So therefore, it can't reproduce with anything else, and that species will die out. Now, that individual may in fact live a long, healthy life, but it's sterile. An example, and I showed you a picture earlier, the horse and the donkey, they produce a mule. A mule is, it can't reproduce with other mules, it can't reproduce with a horse and a donkey, it can't reproduce with anything. So a mule will live its life and then die. The last post-zygotic barrier is called hybrid breakdown. This is when a hybrid is actually created. So we got a zygote, we have an embryo, it lives to be born or it lives to become an adult, but it cannot produce other viable offspring with other hybrids. A better example here would be, think of a plant, so a cotton plant. If you take a cotton plant and you cross it with another different species of cotton, that's where you get the hybrid. Well, if you take that hybrid cotton and you cross it with another hybrid cotton plant, the offspring, which they could produce offspring, but the offspring are so weak, they usually die early, or they're not a strong enough plant. They don't produce a lot, so there's no purpose to them. They don't live long enough to create more of the same. The diagram that's at the bottom of page 15 is a nice way to summarize all of the barriers that I just talked about. So take a minute to check that out and then keep going. So everything I've just discussed up until this point for chapter 24 has been related to the biological species concept, which again was just how we define what a species is, and it's an individual that can mate with others of its own kind and produce viable and fertile offspring. There are other species concepts that I want to quickly run through, not to the detail that we just talked about a biological species concept. It's also possible to define a species through the ecological species concept, which simply means you're defining a species in terms of its job, in terms of its niche. What is its role in the environment? The pluralistic species concept would mean that you would define a species based on the factors that are most important to an individual, and this is going to vary from species to species. The morphological species concept is going to characterize a species based on the structural features that it has. So think of, anatomically and physiologically, its structural makeup is what would determine it being a certain species in that concept. And then the last one is the genealogical species concept, and this defines a species as a set of organisms with a specific genetic history, a specific family tree of DNA. So that concludes the first part of our notes for chapter 24, and I hope that's helpful.